Miles Carter barely looked up. He had boarded more planes than birthdays, and this one, headed back to Atlanta, felt no different. His custom-tailored coat hung perfectly over the back of the leather seat. Beside him sat a tablet, still glowing with blueprints, untouched. A bottle of sparkling water, unopened. Nothing in his hands, nothing in his eyes. He stared at the quiet runway, like it owed him something. The gate agent approached with a tight smile, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter, we're just confirming your seat. You'll have 2A in first class. We should be boarding shortly." He nodded with a short, polite smile. "That's fine." She lingered. "If you don't mind, we do have a single mother with a standby request. Her daughter's not well, and there's only one first-class seat left. They'd be separated." A pause, barely a breath. "We wouldn't normally ask," she added gently. "But—" "Let her have it," Miles said quietly. "I'll take the aisle." The agent blinked. "Sir, that is the aisle seat." He sighed softly and turned away, eyes back on the runway. "Then I guess she's sitting next to me." 5 minutes later, the mother appeared. Messy ponytail, faded jeans, carrying a backpack, a boarding pass, and a child cradled against her shoulder. She looked cautious, almost too tired to be embarrassed. The little girl was bundled in a pink jacket and knit hat, far too warm for the Charleston spring air. Her small arms gripped a stuffed animal, a worn bunny with drooping ears and a threadbare ribbon. Miles didn't look up until he felt a tug at his sleeve. "Excuse me." A soft voice. The girl. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes too large for her small face. She looked up at him like she'd seen him in a storybook before. "Can I sit here?" she asked, lifting the stuffed bunny like a co-pilot. Miles blinked. Something in his chest shifted, not painfully, but sharply, like a corner of memory being scraped clean. He nodded once and helped her climb into the seat. The mother buckled herself in beside them, offering a quiet, "Thank you." Her voice was careful, rehearsed in humility. "No problem," Miles said, then added, more gently, "She okay?" The woman glanced sideways, measuring whether to answer. "Just a little rundown today. It's been a lot of travel." Miles didn't press, but he watched as the little girl rested her head on the window, tracing foggy circles on the glass with one finger. Her bunny sat in her lap like it had stories to tell. "What's her name?" he asked. The mother hesitated. "Savannah, but everyone calls her Vanna." "Pretty name," he said. "She picked it herself," the mother added, her smile tugging at something deeper. "Said it sounded like summer." Miles watched Vanna hum softly to her bunny, and something lodged in his throat. He cleared it with a cough and turned back to the window. The plane lifted moments later, engines roaring against the hush inside the cabin. At cruising altitude, a flight attendant brought out drinks. The little girl perked up at the sight of a ginger ale can. Her mother declined, quietly asking for extra napkins instead. Miles reached into his briefcase, pulled out a silver mechanical pencil and a sheet from his sketch pad. He drew a few quick lines. A turret, a tree, a crooked little bench under a weeping willow. Without looking up, he passed the paper across the aisle. Vanna's eyes lit up. "Is this for me?" she asked. Miles nodded. "Only if you finish it for me." She grinned, grabbed a crayon from her bag, and got to work. Her small hands were unsteady, but confident. She added pink stars to the bench. Her bunny got a throne. The mother leaned over. "You an artist?" "Architect," he replied. Close enough. Ah, that explains the castle. She studied him for a moment longer. I'm Grace. He offered his hand. Miles. There was something fragile in her handshake. Not weakness, just wear. A kind of bone-deep exhaustion people don't notice unless they've lived it. Grace sat back, closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. She's been in and out of the hospital the last 6 months. We had to fly down here last minute. Not a lot of options when the waiting list for treatment is months long back home. He didn't ask questions, just nodded. Silence filled the space between them. Then Vanna held up the finished drawing. I made it a dream castle, she said proudly. And that's you on the bench. Miles studied the pink and purple scroll. Sure enough, a stick figure in a suit sat alone under a tree. A girl and a bunny approached from the corner. That's when I sit down, she explained, and say hi. Grace turned, about to apologize again, but Miles just smiled, an actual, real smile. She's got an eye for stories, he said. She makes up a new one every day, Grace replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Keeps her mind off things. They sat like that for the rest of the flight. Quiet, not uncomfortable, just still. When the wheels touched down, Vanna clapped softly. Grace looked at her phone, sighed, and said, Connection's delayed. Figures. Miles stood, retrieved their bag before she could, and said, There's a place near the terminal that serves actual coffee, not the machine kind. Come with me. My treat. Grace looked startled. He raised an eyebrow. For the artist? Vanna lit up. Can Bunny come too? Only if he behaves. 10 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner of the terminal's coffee shop. Vanna colored. Grace sipped slowly. Miles leaned back, watching mother and child, like they were a painting he hadn't seen before. He started, then stopped. Grace looked up. She's a lot. I know. No, she's bright, he said. Like something you didn't realize the world needed until it showed up next to you. Grace blinked. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then her eyes softened. That's what her doctor said once, she whispered. That she burns bright. That some kids just show up in the world glowing. She paused. I just hope she doesn't burn out. The quiet wrapped around them again, not awkward, but heavier now. Full of truths they weren't quite ready to unpack. Eventually, Grace stood, shouldering her backpack. We should go. Don't want to miss the connection. Miles nodded, but not without hesitation. Vanna slipped him the drawing, folded gently, with care. She looked up at him and said, Maybe I'll see you again, builder man. He knelt slightly, eye level with her. I hope so, he said, then added, Keep drawing castles. She nodded. As Grace and Vanna walked toward the gate, Miles sat back down. The drawing still in his hands. The bench. The castle. The girl. The man waiting. He looked around at the terminal's polished tiles and clean walls. Empty. Echoing. Just another place between places. Then he carefully unfolded the picture and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, close to his chest. And for the first time, in a long, long time, he didn't feel like he was flying alone. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The Atlanta skyline greeted Miles with its usual indifference, steel and glass jutting into a gray afternoon. He slid into the back seat of the waiting black sedan, nodding once to the driver. No conversation, just silence and a route he didn't have to give anymore. His phone buzzed as the car pulled away from the curb. Board update, site walkthrough moved to Thursday, investor call rescheduled. A text from his assistant. Efficient, predictable, just like the rest of his life. He responded with a single word, confirmed. But his eyes weren't on the screen. They drifted back to the drawing folded neatly in his coat pocket. Vanna's castle, that crooked bench, the man in the suit waiting under the tree. He hadn't stopped thinking about them since the flight. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Back at his penthouse, he stepped inside and was greeted by silence, the kind of silence that hums like an appliance you can't locate. He dropped his bag near the door and stood there, coat still on, scanning the space. Clean lines, modern lighting. The skyline framed perfectly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was everything he had designed to keep the world out. And now, it just felt sterile. He walked into his office, pulled the sketch from his pocket, and laid it on the desk. He stared at the childlike scribbles. Vanna's bunny in the corner, the purple stars on the bench. His fingers lingered on the edge of the page. And then, almost without thinking, he picked up a pencil and started redrawing it. Cleaner lines, sharper corners, proportions fixed. But the bench stayed, and the girl stayed. He didn't realize how long he'd been at it until the sky outside faded into evening. His phone buzzed again. Another meeting reminder, another board dinner. He ignored it. Instead, he picked up the drawing, folded it gently, and slid it into a frame that had been empty for years, once meant for a family photo that never got taken. 2 days later, Miles walked through the central courtyard of a downtown development site, his newest project, a luxury restoration of Charleston's historic Red Fern Hotel. He moved with quiet authority, clipboard in hand, nodding to engineers and designers. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket again. He let it ring, again. He finally picked it up on the third call. "Miles Carter," he answered curtly. "Mr. Carter, hi. This is Dr. Rhea Chen, calling from MUSC Children's. I hope this isn't a bad time." His chest tightened unexpectedly. "No, it's fine," he said quickly. "Everything okay?" A pause on the line. "I believe you flew with a patient of ours recently. Savannah Whitman? Her mother gave me your number, with permission, of course. She mentioned your kindness, and, well, Vanna's been asking for you." Miles blinked. What? "She keeps talking about Builder Man. Said she made a promise to show you her magic stars next time." He was quiet for a beat too long. The doctor filled the silence gently. "You don't have to come, but sometimes a familiar face helps with long treatments, especially the hard days." Miles looked out over the scaffolding and crumbling balconies of the Red Fern. He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow." The children's hospital wasn't what he expected. It was cheerful but honest, not garish. Bright colors on the walls. A quiet kind of courage in the air. He signed in at the front desk, and within minutes, Dr. Chen met him by the elevator. "She's finishing a round of fluids," she explained. "Grace didn't expect you to come, but Vanna's been asking all morning." As they walked down the hallway, Miles paused at a mural on the wall. Drawings by children, pasted in a line like a gallery of small, unfiltered truths. There, near the center, was one that stopped him. A bench, a tree, a castle, a man with a bunny, his throat caught. Dr. Chen noticed. She's been recreating it in every art session. He said nothing. Inside the room, Vanna sat propped up on pillows, a knit hat pulled over her head, clutching her ever-present bunny. When she saw him, her face lit up so suddenly, it startled him. "You came," she squealed, arms wide. "I said I might," he said softly. She pouted. "That's not the same as yes." Grace, sitting nearby with a cup of coffee and a half-read book, looked up. Her expression was a mix of surprise and something softer, unreadable. "You didn't have to," she started. "I wanted to," Miles interrupted gently. Vanna scooted over, making space. "Want to see my stars?" He nodded and sat down. She pulled a black sheet of construction paper from a folder. Dozens of tiny stickers glittered like constellations. One star in the corner had a tiny pink heart drawn beside it. "That one's you," she whispered. His breath hitched, but he smiled. "Why me?" "Because you sat with me when no one else did." The room went quiet. Miles felt Grace's eyes on him, but he couldn't meet them. Instead, he looked at the little girl beside him, full of light, full of stories, even when her skin was pale and her hands trembled. "You remember the castle you drew?" he asked. She nodded eagerly. "I started building it." Her eyes grew round. "You did?" "In my head," he said with a wink. "It's a start." Grace let out a quiet laugh, a sound so faint it almost didn't register. But Miles heard it, and something in him settled just a little. They stayed like that for a while. No meetings, no clocks, just paper stars, bunny stories, and quiet conversations. When visiting hours ended, Grace walked him out. The elevator dinged quietly. They stood in the hallway, both awkwardly avoiding eye contact. "She talks about you more than anyone else these days," Grace said finally. "She barely knows me." "She doesn't need time to know people. She just feels them." A pause. "You're not what I expected," she added. "Is that a good thing?" "I haven't decided yet." They both smiled. But just before the elevator closed, Grace spoke again, softer this time, almost hesitant. "She gets attached quickly. I want you to be careful." Miles looked at her. Really looked. "I don't do things halfway," he said. The doors slid shut. And for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely sure what floor he belonged on anymore. Miles didn't sleep well that night. Not because of the city noise or the endless ping of calendar alerts on his phone. It was something quieter that unsettled him, something far less logical. A girl with pink stars and a bunny with bent ears. He lay in bed longer than usual, watching the morning light spread across the ceiling in soft gold lines. He was due back at the Red Fern site by 9 a.m., but for once, he let the minutes pass without urgency. He reached for his phone and stared at the photo he'd taken at the hospital, Vanna's drawing of the castle. He hadn't intended to keep it. It just felt wrong to leave without something tangible. And now, he couldn't stop looking at it. He set the phone down, swung his legs over the edge of the bed, and sat there, alone. Again. The silence was louder than usual. Later that morning, he stood outside the cafe on King Street, a little local place that smelled like cinnamon and old wood. His assistant had insisted he try it for meetings. It was more charming than his usual hotel lobbies. He hadn't expected to see Grace. She was inside, seated near the window, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. A half-read book sat beside a mug of coffee. She looked peaceful, guarded, but softer, like someone who carried too many bags but refused to let them touch the floor. Vanna wasn't with her. For a moment, Miles considered walking away. This wasn't planned. He wasn't ready. But then she looked up, and their eyes met. She blinked in surprise, then gave a small, uncertain smile, like she wasn't sure if it was okay to smile at him outside of hospital walls. He stepped inside. "Twice in 1 week?" she said, voice light but edged with curiosity. "I was told the coffee here was worth rerouting a day," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. She raised an eyebrow. "And you just happened to stumble in while I'm here?" "Total accident," he said. She stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. The waitress approached. "Coffee?" Miles nodded. "Black, please." Grace leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "Vanna's at art therapy. Thursdays are her good days." He nodded. "That's good to hear." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was aware. The kind of silence that asked questions neither of them knew how to phrase yet. Finally, she broke it. "I'm not used to people sticking around." Miles looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, people show up when it's easy, when it's convenient, but when things get complicated..." She shrugged. "They disappear." "That's not me." "You say that now." The waitress returned with coffee, breaking the moment like a dropped pin in a still room. Grace wrapped her hands around her mug. "Sorry," she said after a while. "That came out wrong. I've been doing this alone a long time." "You shouldn't have to." "That's kind of the point, isn't it?" she said, eyes flickering. "We don't get to choose how life unfolds, just how we survive it." Miles stirred his coffee slowly, watching the swirl fade. "Maybe, but survival isn't the same as living." Grace went quiet. That line hung in the air, more personal than he meant it to be. She looked out the window. "I used to teach," she said softly. "Or I was going to early childhood education. I had 1 semester left." "What happened?" She gave him a look. "Take a wild guess." Miles softened. "Vanna." "She came with a whole new lesson plan," Grace said. "Not bitter, just factual. One no one prepares you for." Miles leaned forward. "Do you miss it?" "Every day," she admitted. "But then she laughs, or she draws a bunny on a planet, and I think, maybe this is the classroom I was supposed to be in." He smiled. "That sounds like something Vanna would say." "She says a lot of things." Grace paused. "Like how you're going to build her a rocket castle." He laughed. "She's persuasive. She's also stubborn. Gets that from me." Their eyes locked for a second too long, and just like that, the tension shifted. Warmer. Closer. Not romantic yet, but the air carried potential. The kind that makes people lean forward without realizing it. Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, sighed. "Therapy's over early. I need to pick her up." Miles stood with her. "I'll walk you." "You don't have to." "I want to." They walked in silence down the cobblestone sidewalk. Spring was folding into the edges of the city. Wisteria blooming in bursts along iron gates, the scent of gardenia trailing in the breeze. When they reached the therapy building, Grace paused. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee, and for not disappearing." Miles met her eyes. For the record, I wasn't supposed to be at the airport that day. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I missed my original flight. First time in years. I was supposed to be in New York. She looked at him, quiet for a beat. So, what changed? He hesitated, then, nothing felt urgent that morning, until she asked if she could sit beside me. Grace swallowed, emotion flickering across her features. She nodded once. I'll see you around, Miles. And with that, she stepped inside. Miles stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, the sound of the city pressing in around him. He hadn't meant to care, but somehow, it was already too late. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The air that afternoon carried the thick humidity only Charleston could manage, before spring gave way to heat. The breeze was barely enough to rustle the moss hanging from the oaks in Hampton Park, but it didn't matter. Vanna ran through it like the whole world was moving at her speed. Miles watched from the shaded bench, coat folded beside him, sleeves rolled up just past his elbows. He'd never planned to spend a weekday afternoon like this, watching a little girl twirl in circles until she collapsed into giggles. But here he was. And it didn't feel like a mistake. She calls this her adventure park, Grace said as she approached, carrying 2 iced lemonades. It's her favorite place when she's feeling strong. He accepted the drink with a nod. She looks strong today. Grace smiled, but her eyes gave her away. Today's a good day. Doesn't mean tomorrow will be. They sat side by side, elbows nearly touching, watching Vanna pick flowers from a patch of wild clover. She's been asking for you every day since the cafe, Grace said softly. She even drew a picture of us, 3 stick figures under a rainbow. You had a hat on for some reason. Miles smiled. Maybe I needed one. Grace studied him for a moment. She doesn't attach lightly, you know. I didn't expect her to. I'm not just talking about her. The words hung there. He turned toward her, voice quieter. Are you warning me off? She didn't answer right away. I'm just trying to keep things safe. For her. For me. I get that. Do you? She asked, eyes narrowing just slightly. I've built a life around safety, Grace. Around walls. But she got through in one afternoon. And you're the first person in years who makes silence feel full instead of empty. Her expression softened, then fell again. That sounds nice, but it's dangerous. How? Because the moment something feels real, life tends to take it away. Miles didn't argue. He couldn't. They watched Vanna for a while longer in silence. She was crouched beside a tree now, speaking in whispers to her bunny, lost in some imagined story. Her hat had slipped to one side. Her cheeks were flushed. Is she? Miles began. Grace stood before he could finish. I need to check her color. She crossed the lawn quickly and knelt beside Vanna, gently brushing the hair from her face, checking her forehead. Miles stood too, an unease stirring in his chest. Grace looked back, her voice steady but sharp. She's warm. Should we? I've got it, she said quickly, lifting Vanna into her arms. It's probably just the heat. She didn't eat much today. Vanna stirred, mumbling something about her bunny needing more stars. Miles stepped forward. Let me carry her. No, Grace said, too fast. Then softer. No, I've got her. He hesitated, then nodded. They walked back toward the parking lot. The mood shifted, weight settling into every step. Grace placed Vanna gently in the back seat of her car, buckling her in like it was muscle memory. "I'll take her home, cool her down, make sure she rests." "Do you want me to come with you?" She paused, door half closed. "No." He blinked. "Why not?" "Because I can't afford to need you, Miles. Not like that. Not when I don't even know what this is." His voice dropped. "You think I'm just playing house?" "I think people don't always know what they're doing when they step into someone else's storm." A beat passed. "And you think you're the storm?" She looked at him then, fully, eyes glinting with something between fear and defiance. "No, I think I'm the shore after the storm. Battered, changed, still here, but not the same." Miles stepped closer. "Then let me help rebuild." She exhaled, voice breaking. "You don't get to say things like that." "Why not?" "Because you mean them." Another silence. This one cracked at the edges. Grace looked down at her hands gripping the car door. "I'm tired, Miles," she said, "of starting to hope just long enough for something to fall apart." He nodded slowly. "Then don't hope. Just let me be here." She swallowed hard. "I'll call you if she gets worse." He didn't press. Just stepped back as she closed the door, started the car, and drove away. He stood there in the fading light, the sound of the engine disappearing behind the oaks. A part of him wanted to follow. Another part knew he couldn't. Instead, he returned to the bench where Vanna had been playing. Her little drawing pad had been left behind, open to a half-finished page, crayon lines tracing what looked like a hospital bed, a bunny sitting beside it, and a figure standing at the door, not inside. Outside. Watching. Waiting. Miles sat down, the drawing in his lap, heart hammering in a way he hadn't felt in years. He thought about her words. You don't get to say things like that. But he had. And he meant everyone. Miles waited 2 days before calling, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to say. Grace had drawn a line, sharp, emotional, real, and he respected it. But that didn't mean he could ignore the ache it left. He'd gone back to his routine, meetings, drafts, elevations. He'd stood before a team of designers, pointing at plans for the Red Fern's grand atrium, describing arches and marble finishes with technical precision, while his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He caught himself sketching benches in the margins of contracts, always under trees, always empty. By the third day, the silence was louder than his pride. He called her. It went straight to voicemail. "Grace, it's me. I don't want to push where I'm not welcome, but I'd like to see how she's doing, and how you're doing. I'll be at the cafe on King Street tomorrow at 10. If you come, great. If not, I'll understand." He ended the call without replaying it, then deleted the message from his call log like it would somehow erase the nervous weight in his chest. The next morning, the sky was overcast, the streets damp with leftover rain. He arrived early, too early, and took the table by the window, the one where he first saw her alone, book in hand, unaware of how quickly she'd begin to matter. 10 o'clock came, then 10:15. He stayed seated, sipping cold coffee, trying not to look at the door every time it opened. At 10:24 she walked in, no makeup, hair in a bun, a canvas tote slung over one shoulder, and in her arms, Vanna. Miles stood, unsure if it was relief or guilt that hit him harder. "She asked for you," Grace said quietly. Said her dreams weren't as bright, without her builder in them. Vanna lifted her head from Grace's shoulder, eyes half-lidded, but smiling. "Hi." He stepped forward, gently taking the tote from Grace's shoulder and helping them into the booth. "She's okay?" he asked, voice low. "She had a mild fever. The oncologist said it's normal post-treatment. But it scared me." Grace didn't look at him when she said it. She looked at her daughter, now resting against the window, her bunny tucked beneath her chin. "I sat on the floor of the kitchen that night," she continued, "with her in my arms, too hot and too still. And I kept thinking, I can't do this again. I can't keep doing this alone." Miles felt his throat tighten. "But then I thought about the park, about what you said, about how you looked at her like she wasn't fragile, like she wasn't dying, just living slower than most kids." He said nothing, just waited. Grace met his eyes. "So, I brought her, because maybe I need to stop deciding for her who's safe and who isn't." She looked down. "And maybe I need to stop deciding that for myself too." Miles reached across the table, slowly, his hand resting palm up in the space between them. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. The moment held. Not a declaration, not a promise, just presence. Vanna stirred beside them. "Are y'all gonna build my castle now?" Grace smiled, tears slipping silently down her cheek. "I think we're starting with the front door." Later, they walked to the park. Vanna wanted to swing. She was too tired to go high, but Miles stood behind her, pushing gently, her laughter light as the breeze. Grace watched from the bench. "Can I ask you something?" she said when he returned. "Of course." "Why you? Why did you give up your seat on the plane that day?" Miles sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. "I didn't plan to," he said. "I'd had a brutal week. Was supposed to be in New York for meetings, but I woke up late, missed my flight, ended up on the Charleston connection instead." Grace raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't answer the question." He looked out across the grass, watching Vanna drag her feet in the mulch, her bunny held triumphantly overhead like a trophy. "I saw her face," he said quietly, "and something cracked." Grace waited. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he finally said, "and my son 2 years after that. He was 3. Car accident." Her hand instinctively moved to her heart. "I buried everything," he continued. "Under work, under order, under blueprints and deadlines and wine glasses at charity galas." He turned to her. "Until your daughter asked if she could sit beside me, and I realized I hadn't been present for anything real in years." Grace's eyes glistened. "She's changing you," she said. He shook his head gently. "You are." They sat in silence again. Vanna ran up then, breathless, cheeks pink. "I drew something for y'all." She pulled out a folded paper from her tiny backpack. On it, a house, a bunny, 2 adults on a porch swing. And in the sky, stars, pink, blue, and gold. "This is my safe place," she said proudly. "You built it." Miles didn't speak. He couldn't. Grace reached for his hand again. This time, he didn't wait. He squeezed it, and they stayed like that. 3 souls on a bench, in the middle of a city that finally felt less like somewhere to survive, and more like somewhere to begin. The narrow 2-lane road curved along the edge of the marsh, lined with leaning cypress trees, and the smell of salt and damp pine. Miles hadn't driven this way in years, not since he'd left the beach house behind, sealing it off like a chapter too painful to reread. Now, it was the only place he could think of. Vanna's drawing was still folded in the passenger seat beside him, the one with the porch swing and the stars in the sky. He kept glancing at it like it held directions instead of crayon hearts. The house came into view as he rounded the bend. Whitewashed wood, 2 stories, weather-beaten shutters barely holding on. The porch sagged slightly. The paint on the railing had peeled down to splinters. Weeds wrapped around the steps like they belonged there. But the bones were still good. He parked beneath the old live oak out front, the same tree that used to hold a tire swing. The rope had long since rotted and disappeared, but the limbs stretched wide, like it still remembered the weight of joy. Miles stepped out of the car, taking in the stillness. The air smelled like memory, salt and sun-warmed pine, faint hints of rosemary from the wild bushes his wife once planted in the front bed. He unlocked the door. The scent hit him first. Must, old wood, dust. Then the quiet. Heavy, settled silence. Not cold, not unwelcome, just untouched. The foyer was exactly as he'd left it. The old coat rack stood empty. A family photo still hung crooked by the stairs, Clara's idea of imperfection being charming. She was in it, arms wrapped around their son, both laughing in mid-motion. He'd always loved that about her. She never posed for the camera, just lived in it. He stood staring at the photo until his chest began to ache. Then he turned away. The living room was worn but solid, couches covered in white sheets, fireplace unused. The kitchen was a time capsule of a life paused. A ceramic mug still sat in the sink. He didn't touch it. He climbed the stairs slowly. Every creak of wood beneath his shoes echoed like it remembered his footsteps. He stopped outside the small guest room, the one Clara once called the someday room. Someday for guests, someday for late-night talks, someday for children who visited. He opened the door. The room was bare, walls the color of soft sage, dust dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the single window. He stood in the doorway, unmoving. Then he exhaled. "This is it," he said softly. An hour later, the window was open, fresh air rushing in. He had rolled up his sleeves, cleaned out the old closet, dusted the sills, and pulled up the old rug. A new energy had crept into the space, something warm beneath the grief. He laid the drawing on the center of the floor. That was his blueprint now. A tiny safe place, for her, for them. His phone buzzed from the porch rail where he'd set it down. It was Grace. "Just checking in. Vanna's napping. She talked about you the whole way home." He typed a reply. "I found a place I want to show you. Not yet, but soon." She didn't respond right away, but when she did, it was only 3 words. "We'll be ready." Later, Miles stood on the front porch, eyes on the marsh stretching out behind the property. Birds skimmed the water. Sunlight cracked through a distant cloud bank, scattering gold across the horizon. He closed his eyes. There had been a time he thought he'd never feel anything in this place again. Now, standing there barefoot on weathered wood, breathing in salt and memory, he felt something flicker. Hope. Grace knocked on Marge Delaney's screen door just before sunset. The older woman was already pouring sweet tea into 2 mason jars, as if she'd known. "Figured you'd be by." Grace smiled tiredly. "You always do." "Child's intuition," Marge said, handing her a glass. "Or just 40 years of watching people pretend they're fine when they're not." Grace took a sip and sat on the porch swing. "He's getting under my skin." "Miles?" She nodded. "I don't know what to do with someone like him." "Define someone like him." "Kind, present, doesn't flinch when things get hard." Marge leaned back. "Ah, a unicorn." Grace sighed. It'd be easier if he wasn't good. Then I could walk away. But you don't want to. No, she whispered. And that scares me more than anything. Marge rocked slowly, the wood creaking beneath them. Honey, life is full of people who will love you in the light, but the ones who sit with you in the dark, that's who you keep. Grace stared out at the garden. What if I break him? You won't, Marge said. You already tried, and he stayed. A long pause. Grace blinked away the tears she hadn't realized were rising. Marge reached over, gently squeezing her hand. Sometimes, the things we think will hurt people are exactly what binds them to us. Grace nodded, then said softly, He's building something. Marge smiled. Good. Maybe you are too. Back at the beach house, the sky turned orange, then deep plum. Miles stood barefoot in the empty room, a tape measure in one hand, the drawing in the other. He traced the wall with his fingers. A bench here, he murmured to himself. Bookshelves, low enough for little arms, stars on the ceiling, soft light in the corners. He stopped, his voice catching, and a swing, right outside the window. He stepped back and looked around. There was nothing in the room yet, but for the first time in years, it felt full. Grace stood in the center of her tiny kitchen, phone to her ear, flour dust on her jeans, and the sound of cartoons echoing faintly from the living room. She was mid-call with the pharmacy, again, insurance red tape, a delay on Vanna's prescription. Her voice was polite but clipped, riding that razor's edge between frustration and fatigue. Yes, I understand, but she needs it by Friday. That's when her next round starts. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, listening. I know you're doing your best. I just can't afford another delay. When the call finally ended, she dropped the phone on the counter and leaned against the sink, her shoulders falling forward. Mommy? Vanna's voice called from the other room, soft and curious. Grace wiped her hands on a towel and turned. Yeah, baby? Is Mr. Miles coming today? The question stopped her, not because it surprised her, but because her heart always caught when Vanna asked about him so openly, so trustingly. I don't know, Grace answered honestly. Maybe soon. Vanna thought for a second, then said, He builds quiet places. Grace smiled faintly. He does. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find a large brown envelope leaning against the frame. No return label, no name, just her address and her first name, written in strong, slanted handwriting. She glanced down the street. No sign of a delivery truck. Inside, she peeled it open and slid out a thick cardstock folder. Blueprints. Detailed, carefully labeled, hand-drawn plans for a small cottage-style bedroom with soft curves and child-safe corners. Bookshelves. A reading nook shaped like a half-moon. A window swing. Even the lighting had notes. Warm, low lumen, gentle on eyes, especially at night. At the bottom corner was a small, sketched bunny wearing a tiny builder's hard hat. She laughed, then cried. Not a dramatic cry, not a fall-to-the-floor kind of cry. Just a slow, quiet, grateful one. The kind that rises up when someone sees you more clearly than you ever allowed yourself to be seen. Later that evening, her phone buzzed. Miles. No rush. Just wanted you both to see it. It's just a start. She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. Grace. It's beautiful. She'll love it. I already do. There was a pause. Then another message. Miles. I'd like to take you both out. Nothing fancy. Just something real. She didn't answer right away. She looked over at Vanna, curled up on the couch with her bunny and a blanket, eyes heavy, lashes resting on her cheeks. Grace typed slowly. Grace, we don't do much real around here. It's mostly cartoons and medical bills. Miles, then let's give her one night of magic. Grace, what do you have in mind? There was a pause. Then a new message appeared. Miles, can I show you instead of tell you? Grace stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Her heart wanted to say yes. Her fear wanted to say not yet. But then she remembered the blueprint, the bunny in a hard hat, the swing beneath the stars. She typed, Grace, okay, one night. Friday evening, a silver SUV pulled up outside their apartment. Miles stepped out in jeans and a soft gray button-down, sleeves rolled back, bouquet of white daisies in hand. Simple, clean, thoughtful. Grace opened the door before he could knock. She was wearing a sundress she hadn't touched in over a year. It still fit. Barely. But tonight, that didn't matter. Vanna peeked out from behind her mother, wearing a pink dress with glittering sneakers and a tiara slightly crooked on her head. You look like royalty, Miles said, crouching down. I'm a space princess, Vanna declared. This is my bunny. He's security. Miles smiled. Then I guess I better drive carefully. He opened the car door and helped them in like it was second nature. They drove along the coast, windows down, music low. Vanna hummed to the melody, cheeks glowing in the evening light. Miles glanced over at Grace. Nervous? She shrugged. Terrified. He smiled gently. Me too. They pulled up to a tucked-away spot just off the marsh, a tiny dock with string lights stretched between the trees, a picnic blanket spread beneath a hanging lantern, and a basket already waiting. You did all this? Grace asked, her voice catching. He nodded. Told you it wasn't fancy. Just real. Vanna ran ahead, twirling in the golden light, giggling as her tiara slipped sideways. They sat beneath the trees, eating sandwiches and strawberries and chocolate chip cookies that Miles swore were homemade, even though Grace spotted the bakery tag on the box. Vanna told them stories, half real, half imagined, about a planet made of jelly beans and a rocket ship that needed two builders, one with tools and one with magic words. She means you, Grace said under her breath. I figured, Miles whispered back. As the sun dipped low, fireflies began to blink in the trees. Vanna lay back on the blanket, her bunny tucked beside her. I like this planet, she murmured. Grace brushed her daughter's hair back gently. I do too, she said. Miles sat quietly, watching them, the way Grace's hand moved in slow circles on Vanna's back, the way her eyes reflected the last light of day, the way she looked like someone learning how to breathe again. He cleared his throat. I know I can't fix what you've been through. I can't promise perfect, or even easy. Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable. But I can promise presence. I can promise I won't disappear. She didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, she said, You already showed up more than most ever did. They sat together in the growing dark, the three of them wrapped in a silence that felt like belonging. And as the stars blinked awake overhead, Grace whispered something he almost didn't catch. Maybe one night of magic was exactly what we needed. It rained the next morning, A soft, steady drizzle coated Charleston in silver light, pattering gently against the apartment windows. Grace stood in the kitchen, pouring warm milk into Vanna's favorite mug, the one with the faded cartoon astronaut, and listening to the hum of her daughter's quiet breathing from the couch. Last night had felt unreal, like a bubble of light carved out of everything heavy. It wasn't just the picnic, or the fireflies, or Miles's quiet steadiness. It was the way she felt after. Lighter. Not fixed. Not healed. But possible. The apartment buzzed with soft life. Vanna was curled beneath a blanket, her bunny tucked beneath one arm, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. Grace set the mug beside her. "You warm enough?" Vanna nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. "Is it okay to have dreams during the day?" Grace tilted her head. "What kind of dreams?" "The kind where everything feels soft," Vanna said, eyes still on the window. "Like when Miles holds my hand." Grace felt the breath catch in her chest. Vanna turned to her, serious. "Does he make your dreams soft too?" Grace sat on the edge of the couch, brushing a damp curl off her daughter's forehead. "He makes things feel different." "Good, different." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, good different." That afternoon, as the rain lightened, Grace's phone buzzed. "Miles. Hope you're both warm and dry. I've been working on something. Want to come see?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The idea of leaving the apartment today, after a night like last night, felt fragile, like saying yes too soon might break the magic. But something in her chest stirred. Trust, curiosity, and something quieter, maybe even hope. "Grace, we're in..." "Where to?" Chapter. When they arrived at the beach house, the world was still grey, but the front porch was glowing, soft yellow string lights curling along the railing, the scent of fresh rain on wood. Miles was waiting at the door, holding an umbrella, and that same gentle smile. "Welcome to Phase 2, he said. Inside, the transformation was undeniable. The guest room, the one he'd once called empty, was now full of life. Soft green walls, freshly painted. Shelves already built and half filled with books. A window swing, gently rocking in the breeze. And in the center of the room, a low bed with a comforter patterned with stars. Vanna's eyes widened. "Is this for me?" Miles crouched beside her. "Only if you want it to be." She ran straight to the window swing and flopped into it, like it had always been hers. Grace stood silently in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, not defensively, but holding something fragile. "This was your wife's house," she said softly. Miles turned to her, nodding. "It was. It still is, in a way. But she always said this place needed more laughter, more mess, more life." He looked around the room. "I think she'd like this." Grace stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the bookshelf. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." But she did. "I'm scared," she whispered. Miles moved closer. "Of what?" "That if I let this happen, if I let us happen, something will go wrong. That Vanna will get attached. That it'll all vanish." He didn't try to argue, just took a slow breath and stepped close enough that she could hear the weight behind his voice. "I can't promise the future. I can't promise Vanna won't still have hard days, but I can promise I won't leave. Not unless you tell me to." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "And if I do? Then I'll stand outside the storm. As long as it takes." Her jaw trembled slightly, but she nodded. In the next room, Vanna's laughter rang out as she discovered the drawer full of art supplies tucked beneath the bed. "I'm going to draw a planet where we can all live," she shouted. "And nobody ever gets sick there." Grace closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I want to believe in that planet," she said. "You already do," Miles replied. "You just forgot what it felt like." They stayed like that for a while, two people on the edge of something they weren't ready to name. But it was there, alive, steady. Later, as twilight crept in, Grace helped Vanna into her car seat, while Miles loaded the back with a box of books Grace had brought from their apartment. Just as he was about to close the trunk, a car pulled into the drive behind them. A red sedan. Clean. Out of place. The woman who stepped out wore heels, even on gravel. She was tall, polished, with hair that didn't move in the breeze. In her hand was a notepad, slung across her shoulder, a bag with a press tag barely visible at the top. "Excuse me?" she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm looking for Grace Holloway." Grace stiffened beside the car. Miles stepped slightly in front of her. "Who's asking?" "I'm Julia Raines, Coastal Life magazine. Just looking to get a quote about a certain architect's sudden reappearance and his new charity project." Her eyes flicked toward Vanna. Grace's voice was ice. "This isn't the time. Or the place." Julia raised an eyebrow. "You've made quite the impression, Ms. Holloway. Some are calling it a Cinderella story." "Then they don't know anything," Grace snapped. Miles placed a hand on Grace's arm. "Steady. Calm." "We're not interested," he said. "Please leave." Julia didn't move at first, but then she smiled again. Public interest stories tend to write themselves, especially when there's a child involved. She turned and walked back to her car, the tail lights glowing red as she pulled away. Grace didn't speak, didn't move. Miles did. "We'll handle it," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes dark with something between fear and fury. "Vanna can't be a headline. She won't be." Grace nodded once, firm. But inside something had cracked. Something small, but real. The world outside their safe little bubble had just knocked on the door. And it wasn't going away. The article dropped 3 days later. Grace didn't know it was live until Marge called, voice tight with concern. "Sweetheart, don't panic, but I think you should see this." It was titled, "The Architect, the Widow, and the Girl with Stars in Her Eyes." Subheadline, "A Charleston Love Story That Started in the Sky." Grace clicked the link with trembling fingers. The first photo nearly knocked the air from her lungs. It was of Vanna, swinging in the park, bunny in hand, tiara slipping sideways, the sky a soft Carolina blue behind her. Then another, Grace and Miles on the dock, sitting side by side under string lights. Miles was looking at her with quiet intensity. Grace remembered that moment. She'd just told him she was scared. Now the world could see it too. The article painted them in soft pastels, like characters in a fairy tale. Miles, the reclusive architect with a tragic past. Grace, the resilient single mother, struggling to keep her daughter afloat through stormy waters. Vanna, the tiny light that pulled 2 fractured lives into orbit. It would have been beautiful if it hadn't felt like theft. They hadn't been ready. The article named the hospital, the city, their first date. It even hinted at Vanna's condition, without using the word leukemia, but implying just enough for readers to fill in the blanks. And the worst part? The comments. Grace barely skimmed them, but they were already filling with opinions. Some kind, some cruel, most shallow. She's just chasing money. He's too good to be true. Why put a sick child in the spotlight? She slammed her laptop shut, heart hammering. That afternoon, when Miles showed up at the apartment, she didn't let him speak right away. She opened the door, eyes blazing. Did you know she was writing it? His jaw tensed. No, I had no idea. She was at your house. I told her to leave. Grace folded her arms, breathing sharp. Well, she didn't. She watched us, took pictures, wrote it like we're some romantic fairy tale people can comment on over coffee. Miles looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were rimmed red, his shirt wrinkled. I'm trying to fix it. Grace's voice cracked. This isn't a blueprint, Miles. You can't just fix it with a better design. He stepped closer. I know, but I can try to shield you. She shook her head. You don't get it. You can't shield me. Not from this. This is my life. And now it's out there for the whole world to pick apart. There was a long silence. Then Vanna padded into the hallway, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, why are you loud? Grace knelt, scooping her into her arms. Just talking, baby. Vanna blinked sleepily at Miles. Did you bring me more stars? He tried to smile. Not today, but maybe soon. Vanna rested her head on Grace's shoulder. I like when you build things. Miles looked at Grace. May I talk to you alone? She hesitated, then nodded, handing Vanna her bunny and sending her back to bed with a quiet promise to join her soon. Miles stood in the kitchen, watching the rain bead along the window. Grace leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I gave an interview 6 months ago, he said quietly, before I ever met you. It was for a local architecture feature. Julia was the writer. Grace stayed silent. She reached out again recently, asking about my new project. I told her it was personal, that it wasn't press material. I made that very clear. And yet, she still followed us. Grace said bitterly. He nodded. I think she saw a bigger story, one that would sell. Grace exhaled through her nose, the fury dulling into exhaustion. What do we do now? We push back, Miles said. I have a lawyer drafting a statement. She crossed lines, ethically, legally. I'll do whatever it takes to get it taken down. And the photos? I'm going to make sure Vanna's never used like that again. Grace's voice softened. This was supposed to be just us. I know, he said, and I should have protected that better. For the first time since opening the article, she saw the weight he was carrying, the guilt in his shoulders, the anger beneath his calm. I'm not mad at you, she said. I'm scared. So am I. She looked at him for a long time, then stepped forward and rested her head against his chest. He didn't move, didn't speak, just held her. And in the silence, the storm outside softened. The rain slowed. The light through the window turned gold. Later that night, after Vanna had fallen asleep, Grace opened her laptop again. She typed a short message, then hovered over the send button for nearly a minute before pressing it. To Julia Rains. Subject: You forgot the real story. You wrote about fairy tales and headlines, but you forgot that love isn't built in starlight. It's built in waiting rooms. In 2 a.m., fevers and insurance calls and paper hearts drawn by a child who just wants to live. You saw a story, but you didn't see us. Don't ever use my daughter again. Grace Holloway. She hit send, then shut the laptop, and walked into Vanna's room, lying beside her quietly. In the dark, her daughter reached for her hand. "Are we okay, Mommy?" Grace squeezed gently. "We're more than okay, baby. We're real." The days that followed felt like walking a wire stretched between calm and collapse. Grace had stopped reading the comments. Miles made sure the story came down. His legal team moved quickly and quietly, but the ripples were already there. A few neighbors started watching her differently. A woman at the pharmacy asked, "Is that your daughter from the article?" With too much sweetness in her tone, the kind that made Grace want to disappear. But the real storm didn't come from the outside. It came from within, because something had shifted, not between her and Miles exactly, but around them. The safety bubble they'd built had been pierced. And even though he did everything right, kept showing up, kept building, kept listening, Grace felt herself pulling back. She didn't mean to, but every time he looked at her with that quiet softness in his eyes, she could feel a wall rising in her chest, brick by careful brick, and he noticed. That evening, Miles stopped by with a folded piece of paper in his hand, and that same calm energy that could either comfort or crack her, depending on the day. "I've been working on the swing," he said, offering the paper. She opened it. Another sketch, more refined. The porch swing now had stars carved into the armrests. Beneath it, tiny flowers Vanna had once drawn in crayon. "She's gonna love this," Grace said, forcing a smile. But Miles didn't smile back. "You haven't returned my calls." Grace blinked. "I've been busy." "You always are." There was a pause. Then he said gently, "Are you pulling away?" The question sat between them like an unspoken dare. Grace folded the sketch slowly, fingers trembling just enough to give her away. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. Miles nodded once. "Okay. I'm trying to protect her, and myself. And maybe that means making space. Or maybe it means running. I don't even know anymore." He didn't press her. Just leaned against the doorframe, voice low. "I'm not asking for certainty. I'm just asking you not to disappear." She met his eyes. "And if I do?" His expression cracked just a little. "Then I'll wait." Again. She looked down, unable to hold his gaze. Vanna's laughter floated down the hall. She was singing in her room, some made-up tune about galaxies and glitter and bunny astronauts. Grace closed her eyes. "I want this to work," she whispered. "But I'm terrified of what it'll cost." Miles stepped forward, placing the folded sketch in her hand. "It already costs you everything not to try." He left without another word. That night, Grace lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and Vanna's steady breathing from down the hall. She thought of the article, of the people who saw her as a symbol instead of a person. She thought of Miles, his hands, his patience, his hurt. And she thought of herself, frozen in the middle. The next morning, she packed an overnight bag and buckled Vanna into the back seat. "Where are we going?" Vanna asked. "To the beach," Grace said. "Like beach? With sand and salt and crab shells?" "Exactly that," Vanna squealed. "Are we building things?" Grace smiled. "That's the plan." The beach house was quiet when they arrived, early sunlight painting gold stripes across the porch. Grace knocked twice before letting herself in. Miles was in the back room, toolbox open, sawdust on his sleeves. He looked up, surprised. Grace didn't speak. She just walked across the room and handed him the sketch he'd given her. "I want to help build it," she said. He stared at her. "I don't mean just the swing," she continued. "I mean all of it." He stepped closer. "Even if it's messy?" "Especially if it's messy." His voice lowered. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm not walking away." Miles nodded, slow and full of something that almost looked like relief. Then Vanna burst through the door with her bunny held high. "I'm going to paint the stars purple," she declared. Grace laughed. "We'll need paint then." Miles crouched beside her. "Purple it is, Your Majesty." The rest of the day was quiet joy. They painted. They sanded. They got splinters and sunburned cheeks and smudges of paint on their clothes. Grace accidentally dipped her elbow in a paint tray, and Miles laughed so hard he dropped a hammer. At one point, Vanna fell asleep on a blanket in the yard, Bunny tucked beneath her cheek. Grace and Miles sat on the porch, sipping iced tea. She looked out at the water, then at him. "Do you ever feel like we're holding our breath?" He nodded. "Every day." She exhaled slowly. "I want to stop holding mine." He didn't say anything, just reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. They sat there, fingers laced together, while the wind rustled through the trees and the ocean whispered something secret just beyond the dunes. For the first time in a long time, Grace didn't feel like she was waiting for something bad to happen. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found the place where the breath could finally come. It started with a nosebleed. Nothing dramatic. Just a few red dots on Vanna's pajama collar one morning. Grace dabbed it with a warm cloth, kissed her forehead, and chalked it up to dry air. But the next day, it happened again. This time, after brushing her teeth. A longer trickle. A little slower to stop. And that's when the quiet voice in Grace's chest, the one that had learned to live in shadows and wait for the worst, began whispering again. She called the clinic. They squeezed Vanna in for an early appointment the following morning. That night, Miles offered to stay over. He didn't ask. Just showed up with a tote bag and a calmness Grace didn't realize she needed until she opened the door and saw him there. They tucked Vanna in together. She was still her bright little self, giggling about dreams and starlight, her bunny under one arm, her drawings of imaginary planets scattered across the bed. But Grace watched the color in her cheeks, noticed how fast she fell asleep, how her little chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Afterward, they sat on the couch. Neither turned on the TV. Miles leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you want to talk about it?" Grace shook her head. "I don't know what to say yet." He nodded, respectful of the space, but his eyes stayed on her like he was holding her steady from the inside. "I'm here," he said. She looked at him then, really looked, and the dam cracked. "What if it's coming back?" she whispered. "What if everything we've built is just waiting to be taken from us again?" Miles moved to her, slow and gentle. He sat beside her, close but not pressing. "I ask myself the same question every day," he said. "About you. About her." Grace blinked at him. "I lost my family, Grace. I know what it's like to fear the silence more than the chaos. But I also know that loving through the fear is the only way I made it back to myself." Her lips parted, trembling. "And what if loving her means losing her?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Then we'll love her, even harder." Grace broke then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears falling down her cheeks as she leaned into him and let the weight she'd carried alone for years fall, finally, onto someone else's shoulder. They didn't sleep much that night. Grace sat in Vanna's room until nearly 3 a.m, brushing strands of hair off her daughter's forehead, whispering stories from memory, and tracing her thumb along Vanna's tiny fingers. And Miles stayed close, always a few feet away, always ready to carry what she couldn't say out loud. The next morning at the clinic, the hall smelled like lemon cleaner and something more sterile. Grace filled out forms with shaking hands. Miles held Vanna's other hand while she flipped through a coloring book in the waiting room. When they called her name, the 3 of them walked down the hallway together. Grace had never hated that hallway more. The way it seemed to hum with old echoes. Every fluorescent light above them felt like a judgment. They took blood, ran vitals, asked questions that Grace had answered 100 times before, but that now felt heavier. How has her energy been this week? Any bruising that didn't seem to make sense? Has she had any fevers? The nurse was kind, but Grace could feel the shift in tone, the concern in the glances exchanged, the silence in between the lines. They waited in a small room with seafoam green walls and a paper-covered exam table. Vanna sat on it, swinging her legs, unaware, talking to Miles about what kind of animals she thought lived on Neptune. Grace sat still, staring at the door, waiting for it to open and confirm everything she was trying not to believe. When the doctor finally walked in, she was calm, professional, but her face told the story before her mouth could. "We're seeing some changes in her counts," she said. "It could be a number of things, and we need to run more tests. But we're concerned there may be early signs of relapse." Grace's heart stopped. Just stopped. She nodded slowly, like her body understood before her mind could catch up. Miles reached for her hand, but she didn't feel it. Vanna looked between them. "Mommy? What's relapse?" Grace swallowed hard, then smiled. Or tried to. "It's just a word doctors use when they need to look closer, baby. That's all." Vanna nodded, like that was enough. But Grace's world had already started spinning. That evening, they were back at the beach house. It had become the only place that didn't feel suffocating. Vanna was asleep early, curled up in the window swing with her bunny and the faintest flush on her cheeks. Her coloring book lay open beside her, unfinished stars trailing into the margin. Grace stood on the back deck, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the horizon. Miles stepped up behind her. "She's strong," he said. Grace nodded. "But I'm tired." "I know." She turned to him. "What if I can't do this again?" Miles looked at her with something deeper than comfort, something rooted. "Then I'll carry you through it." She looked away, jaw clenched. "I hate that it's happening now. Just when I started to let go. Just when I started to believe this could be more than temporary." He stepped closer. "It is more." Grace's voice cracked. "Then why does it feel like we're about to lose it all?" He didn't have a perfect answer, but he wrapped his arms around her from behind, held her against him, and whispered, "Because the things that matter most always feel like they're slipping just when we need them most." And in that silence, as the sky darkened and the ocean hummed against the shore, They stood wrapped in something stronger than fear. Love wasn't safe. It wasn't certain. But it was real. And in that moment, that had to be enough. Grace had forgotten how loud hospitals could be. Even the quiet ones, the good ones, with soft lighting and muted walls, still carried a hum underneath everything. Monitors beeping, shoes squeaking on waxed tile, doors hissing shut like sighs that never ended. She sat by Vanna's bed, gripping her daughter's tiny hand, trying to anchor herself to something other than the fear clawing through her chest. It had been 3 days since the blood work came back. 3 days of follow-ups. And her scans, needle pricks, medical jargon that spiraled around Grace like a language she'd once learned but was now too afraid to speak. Relapse. The word hovered unspoken in every hallway. Dr. Larson had been kind, gentle with her words. We're hopeful. It's early. There are new protocols now. But Grace heard the truth tucked in every pause. Vanna might be sick again, and this time the road would be longer, harder. "Mommy?" The soft voice pulled her back. Vanna was blinking up at her, pale but smiling. Her cheeks were puffier now. Steroids, they said, but her eyes still sparkled, even under fluorescent light. "Hey, baby," Grace whispered, brushing hair from her forehead. "Can you tell me the sky story again?" Grace smiled, her throat tight. "Which one?" "The one about the girl with the stars in her pockets." She shifted on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket gently up over Vanna's legs. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who caught stardust every time she laughed. Vanna listened with closed eyes, her lashes dark against pale skin, her hand warm and soft in Grace's. Miles watched from the doorway. He didn't interrupt, just leaned there, his presence steady, like a lighthouse cutting through fog. Later, after Vanna had dozed off again, Grace stepped out into the hallway with him. "I don't know how much more I can take," she said softly. "You don't have to do it alone," Miles replied. Grace looked up at him, eyes tired. "You say that like it makes it easier." "No," he said, "but it makes it real." They sat together in the family lounge. Those small, too-clean rooms, hospitals offered like a band-aid for the soul. A coffee machine hummed in the corner. The TV was on mute, playing some cooking show nobody watched. Grace sipped from a styrofoam cup. "She keeps asking me when she can go back to school, when we can finish the swing." "We will," Miles said. Grace glanced at him. "You always talk like you believe in the future." "I have to. It's the only way I survived mine." She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to believe that if I stayed guarded, if I didn't hope too much, then maybe I wouldn't break when things fell apart. And now I'm breaking anyway. And I just wish I'd let myself love more fully when things were good." Miles reached over, his hand brushing hers. Not grabbing. Just present. "You did," he said. "Even when you were scared, you still loved." Grace didn't answer right away. Then, "Do you think love is enough to hold something together?" "I think it's the only thing that ever has." The door opened quietly behind them. A nurse stepped in, smiling gently. "Ms. Holloway, she's asking for you." Grace stood, heart aching with equal parts fear and devotion. Before she turned to go, she looked back at Miles. "Will you stay?" He nodded. "Always." Back in the room, Vanna was sitting up a little, fiddling with her IV tubing like it was a string of beads. Grace sat beside her, brushing her cheek. "Feeling okay?" Vanna nodded. "They gave me the sparkly medicine again." Grace smiled. "That's good. That medicine is strong. Like you." Vanna looked at her mom for a long time. "Is this like last time?" she asked. Grace's throat tightened. "What do you remember about last time?" "The nurses were nice, and the jello was weird, and you cried a lot in the bathroom when you thought I couldn't hear." Grace froze. Vanna reached out, placing her small hand over her mom's. "It's okay to be scared, Mommy. I'm a little scared too." Grace leaned forward, forehead to forehead with her daughter. "You are the bravest soul I've ever known." Vanna smiled, sleepy again. "That's 'cause I'm half magic." "You are." "And you know what?" she added, yawning. "I think Mr. Miles is too." Grace let out a soft laugh, eyes glassy. "Yeah," she said. "Maybe he is." As Vanna drifted off again, Grace sat still, holding her daughter's hand in both of hers, anchoring herself to that little heartbeat, like it was the rhythm of the whole universe. Outside the room, Miles watched through the window. He could see the weight on Grace's shoulders, the exhaustion in the way she leaned forward. But he also saw the fierceness in her, the fire, the way she stayed when staying was the hardest thing to do. He pressed his hand to the glass for a moment, like a silent vow, then turned and walked toward the nurse's station. "I'd like to speak to someone," he said quietly, "about being added to the visitation list." The nurse looked up. "Are you family?" He paused for a heartbeat, then answered, calm and clear. "I'm working on it." The sky outside the hospital window was the kind of blue that begged for barefoot walks and lemon-scented breezes. But inside, everything was cold, still, and clinical. Machines beeped softly. Nurses whispered. Time moved like molasses. Grace had learned to live in these pockets of waiting, between results, between shifts, between small miracles and quiet disappointments. Vanna was sleeping. Grace sat curled in the reclining chair, arms wrapped around herself, listening to the faint sounds of her daughter's breathing. A coloring page with half-finished butterflies lay on the side tray. A single crayon rolled slowly back and forth every time she moved her leg. Miles returned just past noon with a paper bag of food that smelled of warm tomato soup and grilled cheese. "You didn't eat breakfast," he said, placing the bag on the side table. Grace didn't argue, but she didn't reach for it either. "She finally fell asleep?" he asked, glancing at Vanna. Grace nodded, eyes still on her daughter. She kept asking if she'd lose her hair again. Miles sat beside her, close enough to offer warmth, far enough to let her breathe. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it might happen, and that if it did, we'd paint stars on her head and she could be a galaxy girl again." Miles smiled faintly. "She'll love that." Grace let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "She said something yesterday, something I can't stop hearing." He looked at her, waiting. "She said, 'If I fall asleep for too long, don't let Mommy be alone.'" Grace's voice cracked. Like she knew something. Like she's protecting me more than I protect her. Miles reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "She's holding on. Just like you." Grace turned to him, voice low. "I don't know how to keep doing this." "You don't have to know. You just do it. 1 minute, then the next." The silence between them deepened, not empty, but charged. Grace whispered, "She calls you her galaxy builder now." Did you know that? He smiled, a real one this time. She told me yesterday. She wants the swing finished before it gets cold. She believes in the swing, Grace said. She believes we'll all be on it together. We will be. Grace studied him for a long moment, the faint stubble on his jaw, the soft crease near his eyes, the steadiness she'd come to depend on like breath. You never asked me to let you in, she said. I didn't have to, he replied. You opened the door. She turned her hand, lacing their fingers, and in that small act, something shifted again, this time not in fear, but in trust. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. Julia. Grace stiffened. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, Julia said softly, standing in the doorway, holding a small cloth bag. But I needed to come. Miles stood. You shouldn't be here. I'm not here to write. I swear. I resigned 2 days ago. Grace blinked. What? Julia looked directly at her. After that article ran, I realized I crossed a line I can't uncross. I took your life and made it digestible content, and I was wrong. She stepped forward slowly, setting the cloth bag on the table near Vanna's bed. This is for her, she said. It's from a woman who read the article. Her son had leukemia. She said Vanna reminded her of him. The bag's filled with art supplies. She wanted to give her color. Grace looked at the bag, lips parted. You're not writing about this? No, Julia said. I'm not that person anymore. She turned to leave, then paused. She's lucky, you know, to have both of you. And with that, she was gone. Miles glanced at Grace, who was still staring at the small cloth bag. After a long beat, she said, People are never just one thing, are they? No, he said quietly. Neither are we. That evening, Vanna's counts stabilized, just slightly, but enough to breathe again. They ate soup in the hospital room, Vanna propped up by pillows, Grace feeding her small spoonfuls while Miles drew galaxies on napkins beside her. I think you should marry him, Vanna said out of nowhere, eyes on Grace. Grace nearly dropped the spoon. Excuse me? You already love each other. I heard you talking last night. Miles turned a shade of red, Grace hadn't seen before. Grace laughed, then blinked back tears. We were just talking about swing designs. Vanna raised an eyebrow. You said, he's the only one I want beside me if she wakes up scared in the middle of the night. That's love. Grace bit her lip. Well, Miles said, clearing his throat. She's not wrong. They all laughed. Quiet, relieved laughter that felt like sunlight after too many days of rain. That night, after Vanna was asleep again, Miles leaned in the doorway. I don't need an answer tonight, he said softly. But I meant what I told her. Grace turned, silhouetted by the soft lamplight, her expression unreadable. I know, she said. He stepped forward. But just in case you need a reason. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of wood, one of the carved stars from the porch swing. He placed it in her palm. You don't have to say yes to everything right now, but maybe say yes to this. Just believing in what's possible. Grace looked down at the star, her fingers curling around it. I'll try, she whispered. That's the best I can give right now. Miles leaned forward, kissed her forehead gently, and nodded. Trying's enough. And as the night deepened around them, The hospital quieted, and Grace stood in that soft golden light, holding a carved star in her hand. She realized that, somehow, she was no longer afraid of believing in something again. The beep came slower. Grace knew the rhythm of every machine in that room, like the beat of her own heart. But when the pulse oximeter's chirp turned hesitant, like it was holding its breath, she felt the world lurch sideways. Vanna had been sleeping soundly just minutes before. Miles had stepped out to grab tea from the lobby cafe. The hospital hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and worn-down hope. And then came the change. Grace stood, leaning over the bed. "Vanna?" she whispered, brushing her fingers against her daughter's warm forehead. Nothing. "Sweetheart, Mommy's here." Vanna stirred faintly, but her skin was flushed, damp with sweat, and her breathing, shallow, labored. Grace hit the call button. Within seconds, a nurse rushed in. Her eyes darted to the monitor. Then she tapped her earpiece. "Room 429. I need Dr. Larson. Now." Grace's throat went dry. "What's happening?" The nurse kept her voice calm. "Just a dip. We'll stabilize her." But Grace had been through this before. She knew the language they used when they didn't want to say the worst. "Doctor." Larson appeared like a ghost in a white coat, hair in a hurried bun, gloves already on. "Grace, I need you to step back just for a minute, okay?" "No. Please, just let us work. I promise we'll talk in 2 minutes." Grace backed away but didn't leave. She clung to the edge of the counter, watching as more staff entered, voices quiet but fast, movements efficient. A bag was swapped. Oxygen increased. Everything blurred. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She could hear Vanna's name being said in low, urgent tones. She could hear someone say, "Platelet drop." The door opened again. Miles. He took one look at the room and froze. Grace didn't turn around. She couldn't. Her nails dug into the counter's edge. "Come sit," Miles said softly. "I can't sit." "Then I'll stand with you." He moved beside her, their shoulders touching. He said nothing else, just stood. And somehow, that was everything. After what felt like forever, the hum of voices lowered. The chaos ebbed. Monitors stabilized. Dr. Larson pulled down her mask and approached slowly. "She's okay," she said. "We had a scare, but she's responding again. This happens sometimes with the medication. Her body's just tired." Grace exhaled sharply, the sound half sob, half laugh. Her knees buckled, but Miles caught her, steadying her like scaffolding. "Can I see her?" she asked. Dr. Larson nodded. "She's sleeping, but yes." Grace crossed the room and sat by the bed. Vanna's color was still pale, her lashes clumped together with moisture, her lips parted just enough to breathe through the oxygen tubes. "I'm right here," Grace whispered, brushing a kiss to her temple. "I'm not going anywhere." Behind her, Miles hovered in the doorway. After a moment, Grace turned to him. "I can't lose her," she said. He stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed. "You won't. You don't know that." "No," he admitted, "but I believe it." "And you're allowed to believe it too." Grace looked at Vanna's sleeping face. "She asked me last night what I wished for when I was her age," she murmured. "And I couldn't remember. Isn't that strange?" Miles was quiet. "I think I stopped wishing for things when I realized life could take them away," she continued. "But she still believes. She makes wishes on every falling leaf and dandelion puff. She believes, Miles said gently, because you've never stopped her from hoping. Grace rested her forehead against the mattress, holding Vanna's hand tight. What if this is the beginning of the end? Miles took her other hand. Then we fight for every middle we can, he said. Every day, every swing of the porch, every sunrise. We don't live waiting for the end, Grace. We live because we still have now. Her breath caught. Tears spilled silently. Outside, the sun began to set. The world turned gold, washing the room in light that made everything look softer, kinder. The worst had not happened. Not yet. And for now, that was enough. Later that evening, Vanna stirred awake. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "Mommy." Grace leaned over her instantly. "I'm here." "Did we miss the sunset?" "No, baby. It's right outside the window." Vanna blinked slowly, her small hand reaching for Grace's. "Then will you sit with me and make a wish?" Grace choked back emotion. "Always." She helped Vanna sit up slightly, propping her with pillows, holding her close, and together they looked out the window. "Okay," Grace whispered. "You go first." Vanna closed her eyes. Her lips moved silently. Then she opened them and smiled. "Your turn." Grace stared at the glowing horizon, her heart fuller than she thought it could be after a day like this. "I wish," she began, voice trembling. "I wish this never ends." Vanna leaned her head on Grace's shoulder, content. And in the quiet of that hospital room, with machines humming and shadows stretching long across the floor, hope flickered again, small, fragile, but alive. Spring arrived slowly, like it was afraid to disturb the stillness that winter had left behind. But it came all the same. One soft breeze, one blooming dogwood, one porch swing at a time. It had been 4 months since Vanna's last hospitalization. The treatments were working, tentatively, carefully, but working. Her numbers stabilized, her energy returned, and though Grace never fully relaxed, she'd started to let herself breathe again. That morning, the three of them stood on the back porch of the little craftsman house in Asheville, the house that smelled like sawdust and cinnamon and second chances. Vanna wore a lilac sundress and a wide-brimmed hat she'd decorated with stickers. Her shoes were still on the porch mat. She always forgot them. Grace stood barefoot too, mug in hand, hair pulled up, sunlight warming her face. And Miles, he was kneeling in front of the swing, finishing the last bolt. He stood and wiped his hands on a rag, then looked up at them. "It's ready." Vanna's face lit up like a firefly jar. Grace stepped down first, holding Vanna's hand, leading her gently to the swing like it was made of glass. They sat, Grace in the middle, Vanna on one side, Miles on the other. The swing creaked softly beneath them. The wood was smooth and cool, the ropes knotted with quiet care. A soft breeze moved through the trees. Vanna leaned against Grace's arm. "It's like flying," she whispered. Miles looked out over the yard. "It's exactly like flying." Grace turned to him, eyes soft. "You made this. For both of you." She didn't answer, just reached out and placed her hand over his, right there on the wooden armrest between them. Vanna giggled. "You should kiss now." "Vanna," Grace scolded, blushing. "What?" she shrugged. "It's the end of the movie, that's what happens." They all laughed, long and real and from somewhere deep in the ribs. Later that afternoon, while Vanna played with chalk on the front walk, Grace found Miles in the kitchen, drying a plate. "You've been quiet," she said, leaning against the counter. He looked over at her, the sunlight casting a warm line across his jaw. "Just thinking." "About?" He paused, set the plate down, turned to her. "When we met, I didn't know I needed saving." Grace's breath caught. "I thought I was just building homes for other people," he continued. "But I didn't realize I'd forgotten how to live in one myself. Until you." She swallowed. "You showed up when I wasn't ready." "I wasn't either. But we didn't leave." "No," he said. "We stayed." There was a long silence. Grace stepped forward, standing close now, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember the day I told you I didn't know how to let anyone in?" He nodded. "I think I do now." Miles reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, familiar object, the carved wooden star from the porch swing, worn from months of being held, but still whole. He placed it in her hand. "I saved this for you." Grace looked down at it, blinking back tears. Then slowly, she reached into her own pocket and pulled out the match to it, the second star, the one she'd secretly asked him to carve after the first. She'd kept it all this time, waiting for the moment when she could stop being afraid. She held it out to him. "I saved this for you." They stood there, stars pressed between palms, two people who had found love in the ruins of what they thought they'd lost. Miles smiled. "So, do we make this official?" Grace tilted her head. "Define official." "Dinner on a table that isn't next to an IV pole. A date that doesn't end in discharge papers. Maybe something a little more permanent." She laughed softly, tears escaping before she could stop them. "Ask me again," she said. "What?" "Ask me again. Like you mean it." Miles stepped back, heart pounding, voice low. "Grace Holloway," he said, pulling out a small velvet box from his coat pocket. He'd been carrying it for weeks. She gasped. "Will you let me be the one you lean on, cry with, swing beside? Will you marry me?" Tears slid down her cheeks, and she nodded before she could find the words. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold band, set with a tiny star-shaped diamond. Simple, steady, like them. He slipped it onto her finger. Outside, they heard Vanna shout, "Did you do it yet?" Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, baby. We did," Vanna cheered, spinning in a circle, arms wide like she could catch the sky. That evening, they sat on the porch swing again. All three of them. A family not built by blood or plan, but by choice, by love. As twilight fell, the first stars blinked into view overhead. Grace leaned against Miles. "You know," she said, "it wasn't just a seat on a plane." He kissed her temple. "No, it was the space between grief and love, and she filled it." They both looked at Vanna, who had fallen asleep on the swing between them, fingers still dusted with sidewalk chalk. And in the quiet hush of night, with wind in the trees and the stars above them, the most beautiful love story kept swinging gently forward. Thanks for watching Inspire CC Stories. For more unforgettable stories that touch the heart and uplift the soul, keep coming back to Inspire CC. Until next time, stay inspired with Inspire CC, where every story is a journey worth taking.